Kate Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book. We are coming into the conclusion here of The Age of Insecurity by Astra Taylor, coming together as things fall apart. 4 other previous videos I recommend you watch if you're interested in the topic. This is not dwelling on the dilemmas that we're facing today. It does talk about them, of course, to set the stage, but she does discuss solutions, and the rest of this book is pretty much about that. We were talking about the predation of insurance companies. You might want to go back and listen to that. It's hard to take because it's just so self-serving and so unnecessary. Insurance companies getting insured by other insurance companies to sort of spread the risk. She talked a little bit about Frances Perkins, the first woman in the cabinet who, for Franklin Roosevelt, was the Secretary of Labor. I did a video about her a couple of weeks ago. Remarkable woman. So let's continue. This is video 5. Did I say that? Video 5. And we're going to talk about the author who is discussing something she helped to write, the Debt Resisters Operations Manual. This is financial literacy handbook at its best. Everything you need to know about the story of a float. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Hang on a second, let me find it. Yeah. Okay. The Debt Resistance Operations Manual. Oh, if I could read my own handwriting, it'd be great. This is a great way to begin, isn't it? Everything you need to know to stay afloat. And it is downloadable online, so it's accessible if you're interested. It shows how debtors are not solely at fault for their situation. The financial systems are designed to perpetuate debt and to profit from the insecurity. They encourage collective action on anyone who is against this. If you're suffering from the predation of financial institutions, you should be encouraged that there is collective action. Red Square in 2012 in Quebec, which is squarely in the federal government there, had protests against university tuition hikes in Canada. And they founded a thing called the Debt Collective. They wanted to speak out against media's explanation for the financial crisis. In Wall Street blamed the fiscally irresponsible poor, especially Black people, who took out mortgages they could not afford. Stupid them, right? So these people were targeted for what was called behind their backs ghetto loans. They were targeted for these loans that preyed on them financially. She describes her situation. Let's see if it's not too long. Okay. Like millions of others, I became strapped for cash when the economy crashed. I couldn't keep up with my student loan payments and I defaulted. As punishment for my inability to pay, my principal ballooned by 19% and my credit score was shot. I cried tears of hot shame as I confessed the depth of my predicament to my partner. I was $42,000 in the hole, I told him, but over the next decade or two, I'd likely have to pay over six figures before I was free of debt. I was standing on the equivalent of economic quicksand. The more I paid, the more I owed. It was only when I got swept up in Occupy Wall Street that I realized my situation was not unique. Almost everyone who gathered in Manhattan's Zuccotti Park was in the same insecure and sinking boat. We had all taken on debt for necessities, to get an education, to see a doctor, to buy a home, or even have food to eat, only to realize that what had been sold as a lifeline was in fact an anchor, dragging us down with compounding interest and fees. Sounds all too familiar. So over the last 50 years, there have been well-funded attacks on social insurance, on welfare, and anybody who has high insecurity because of debt. They argue, these opponents of help argue personal responsibility, and they slash at working class gains. Every time you think you're getting ahead, something pulls you back. You can strive for success, but if you fail, it's your own fault. US and Canada rank low in social spending, as by comparison, I think probably to Northern Europe. The hazards of unemployment, disability, old age, and many people don't have a choice as these hazards increase. But they have their plastic safety net, their credit cards. Many have no recourse but to go into debt. If in the United States, you get sick unexpectedly and you're faced with expenses in a hospital visit that you do not have coverage for whatever reason, they approach you with a financial person and try to get you to sign up for a credit card specifically to pay for your medical debt, which, by the way, has a very high rate of interest, obviously. You're in the hospital and they're approaching you with this. Canada has the worst debt ratio of 67, which is even greater than the US. Seniors struggle with debt. Young struggle with student debt and have less financial security. You can't save for a home. You can't save for retirement. The average American graduate is $30,000 in debt. The average Canadian graduate is $28,000 in debt for a bachelor's. Our interests enriches investors. It fuels inequality. It lowers democracy. It weakens it. It destabilizes the economy. It's hard to make ends meet. Often you can't meet interest payments every month even. This is economic quicksand. Before COVID, half of Canadians were $200 from insolvency. Most Americans couldn't find $400 cash for an emergency. In 2023, closer to 70% of debtors, 70% of people are close to insolvency, and debtors need to unify and demand relief. Biden had a plan to wipe out $10,000 to $20,000 of student debt. Republicans and billionaire backers went absolutely crazy. They did not like that whatsoever. Why? Erasing debt would make it harder for employers to retain indebted employees, would discourage young people from joining the military. Opponents of Biden's plan took to Twitter and TV to denounce the idea of handouts for slacker baristas, overeducated Ivy League lawyers, and impractical lesbian dance theory majors. Immune to accusations of hypocrisy, members of Congress who had recently received hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars in pandemic loan forgiveness lambasted the proposal. Debt is a tool of domination, especially racial domination, and it's a source of profit. Debt is a financial and moral failure in the eyes of most people. If you're in debt, you're made to feel shame. In German, debt means the word for debt in German, which I can't pronounce, means guilt and blame. But in the past, creditors were bad. Usury was a sin. That was why Jesus threw the money lenders out of the temple, because they were charging interest. In politics, for example, in the work by Aristotle describes usury as hatred and unnatural, for money was intended to be used in exchange, but not to increase at interest. The Christian church saw charging interest as sinful, associating usury with avarice and sloth. The Bible, after all, commands debts to be forgiven, and making money on interest without lifting a finger was thought to be an insult to the Lord, who said, "By the sweat of your face shall you get bread to eat." Economists have described these long-standing prohibitions as a kind of social insurance and a check on inequality. Poor people had access to emergency funds on terms they could afford, while the ability of the rich to grow their fortunes was constrained. But in the modern world, usury is not only legal, but arguably the foundation of our highly financialized economic system. Today, it's considered the foundation. The industry and capitalism, businesses, they led to this. That's what created it. They see risk as a way to amass wealth and social control. We talked about that in the last video. Over time, the wealthy, including the church, were able to justify usury with theological loopholes. Therefore, it increased merchant capitalism, flipped the idea of lenders as miscreants and debtors as victims. Flip that around. Debtors became transgressors. This is a double standard. Insolvency is okay for the well-to-do. That's the cost of doing business. It's an entrepreneurial risk. For the poor, defaulting on debt is a moral failure, which can end in prison or public humiliation. I don't think prison, unless there's fraud involved. I don't think you go to jail anymore for debt, but you can be completely bankrupt. Today, government bailouts happen for banks and corporations and the rich. There's no debt relief for ordinary people. It drives me nuts. Poor debtors get harsh penalties. The rich get shielded from responsibility. The Hudson Bay Company paid indigenous people in beaver tokens, which was proprietary currency, kind of like Bitcoin, right? And because of the company store system of supplying trappers, they were held to the company by debt. Perpetual debt binds us firmly to the store, one said. In pre-colonial England, land could not be taken to settle mortgage debt. Couldn't repossess it. In the new pre-United States government colonies, foreclosure to expropriate land from the indigenous people was a thing, and it turned the land into a security against debt. Thomas Jefferson was an elitist about debt relief. He advocated eliminating debt for white property men after one generation. Of course he did, because he went into debt. Well, I just read about it yesterday. He went into debt because of what? Oh, he went into debt because in 1815 there was a volcano that created a nuclear winter for a year. There was no summer in the year 1816, and as a result, crops failed. He owned Monticello. It was a working farm, and he went into debt because of it. So of course he advocated for white property landowners to get debt relief. So as a weapon to grab native land through indebtedness to trading houses was the real point. In his life, he accrued enormous debt, and when he died, his enslaved people were sold to pay off his debts. The same process is used today to get farmland by corporations. High levels of debt lead people into the hands of investors and big loans, and it benefits the banks. In the 1980s, the market-friendly changes took away the benefits of collective farm economy practices. Income for farmers went down because of transnational agribusinesses, and debt for farmers skyrocketed. Today, Canadian farmers owe 4 times what they owed in the 90s. Wow. That affects whole communities. Farmers between 1986 and 2018 paid $93 billion or owed $93 billion in interest. Therefore, the public paid for the bank's profits on the farmers' loans. In 2008, the rich bought up farmland when things were cheap, and they were concentrating corporate ownership, rising the prices, betting on the future, about future insecurity about food and water, and they bought up water rights. Many farmers sell the family land and then rent it back as tenant farming. Oh, that's just gotta hurt. This requires maximizing production and prevents time and costs needed to be ecologically aware in their practices. They're hurry up and make money, hurry up and grow things, hurry up and do what you need to do to get the maximum production so that you stay being able to work your own land that you had to sell. And we're not going to worry about anything that slows us down in the way of economic, environmental protection. This is a dead end because it doesn't allow methods needed to deal with climate change, and consolidation of farmland prevents sound ecological measures. And it's all limited by the threat of insolvency, social control. So as debt increases, labor's power goes down, strikes go down, people are afraid, losing any kind of work at all. Farmers have a lot of shame around debt. It's oppressive psychologically. It's isolating, and it prevents seeing it as a common struggle. You don't feel solidarity with people around you. You feel like you're the failure. The scale of this is too big. It requires government intervention and agrarian collectivism and risk sharing. The fault is not the farmers. The fault is the economy that's structured to profit from indebtedness, to treat land as speculative and appreciating increasing profit. And it keeps us isolated and insecure from one another. In 2021, the debt collective paid off the probation debt of 20,000 people in Mississippi and Florida as a gift. People on prison supervision, probation supervision, what happens is you get traffic fines and you can't pay them, and then you get fined for not paying them, and the fees go up and up and up, and they didn't have money to pay, and many were too poor to pay the fines and feed their children. Once paid, they got their licenses back, and it was easier to keep a job. I mean, they took their licenses away until they paid the fees. They compounded the fees. Every time the fees were late, there was another fee charged on top of that. This is just a nightmare. The debt collective bought $3 million in probation debt for 90,000. I guess the government law system that wanted the money, that was waiting to be paid, realized that something was better than nothing. Debt collectors buy debt for pennies on the dollar, and pay less than what you would pay them. You know, they'll try to get blood out of a stone with ordinary people. They'll settle with corporate debt payment. This group, debt collectors, has paid hundreds of millions of debt all across the U.S. to provide relief and to get solidarity and to shine the light on financial speculation. They want to start a movement for systematic change. Defund the police is one of the things, and people think that means take all money away from the police. That's not what it means. It means reprioritize the way money is allocated and spent. It's a political lightning rod, but it's sensible. It means invest in social services and not punishment. Stop charging people fees they can't pay. Try to figure out why the fees are there to begin with. Put money into care and not into the cops. You can't police and imprison your way out of poverty, out of mental health issues, out of addiction, out of a lack of housing and a lack of opportunity. The carceral approach, in other words, putting people in chains, increases insecurity. Jailed people owe a debt to society. What about the rich that benefit from an unequal economy? Right? We're talking here about fairness and morality. Police protect property and wealth, not people. People are seen as a security risk by police, and they're also seen as a credit risk by the rich. It's really important to understand that what we've been told, they're your friends, the cops, they're going to help you, they're going to protect you. When you're really in trouble, you quickly realize that that's not true. I had the police come to my door one day years ago to issue me a ticket because my tires weren't turned to the curb. And I said to him, well, that's a big crime wave. Have you found the person who broke into my car 2 weeks ago and stole everything on the inside? And he said, well, I don't know anything about that. In the US, the average prisoner owes $13,000 in court fines and fees on release, not counting bail. And they don't get their right to vote or their driver's license back to them till it's all paid. States contract with private probation companies who gouge these people and collect with ethical and legal questionable means. Dog the bounty hunter. In California, probationers can be forced to do work. This is involuntary servitude. You can be forced. Black Lives Matter rose from this situation that we're talking about here. Few people realize that the problem of carceral debt helped galvanize the movement against police violence we now know as Black Lives Matter, which began when police killed 18-year-old Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. In 2013, the year before Brown's death, Ferguson officials had issued over 33,000 arrest warrants for a city of just over 21,000. Everybody in town got arrested and more. Many of these warrants were issued because people could not pay their municipal fines and fees, often charges for trivial offenses. A broken taillight, for example, or leaving a trash can on the street. Failure to pay could lead to jail. Oh, that's what they meant. I was thinking debtor's prison. Well, they'll arrest you if you don't pay your fee. The criminal legal system in Ferguson effectively merged an elaborate and punitive mechanism of regressive taxation with a modern-day debtor's prison. Poverty is criminalized. Debt is a tool of coercion. This is all too common. 33,000 arrests in a town of 21,000 people. That is insanity by definition. Most court interactions are about fees the most vulnerable cannot pay. And they usually lead to the loss of driver's license or incarceration. This negatively affects employment, and then they really can't pay. Insecurity is intensified by economic and racial disparities. In Montreal, the homeless make up 1%, and 40% of the tickets they get by law, Montreal bylaws, infractions against them make up 40% of the tickets, and the indigenous people make up the majority of both the homeless and the bylaw infractions. There's a $100 charge for sleeping on a park bench. And people get cited several times in one day. So you have no place to live. And it's the daytime and you happen to fall asleep on a park bench. They move you along, they slap you with a $100 charge. You go somewhere else, you sit, you fall asleep, you get another $100 charge. And the number of tickets they're issuing is rising exponentially. One man owed $40,000 in fines as a result of having nowhere to live or sleep during COVID. Huge amounts of public money are spent trying to collect these debts. Social and economic costs of municipal ticketing programs are not understood by most. And I read this, a while back, and I'd actually forgotten this. It's horrifying. We can extrapolate from analyses of Ontario's Safe Streets Act, which was adopted to curb panhandling, asking for help, asking for money. One 2011 report found that in the span of a decade, the Toronto Police Service spent close to $1 million issuing tickets and reaped a paltry $8,000 in fines as a result. A 2019 Toronto Star editorial called for the act's repeal. They described a disabled man named Donald Dunbar. The province had spent a small fortune jailing him for missing court dates and missing probation appointments related to the $45,000 of fines that he had accumulated, when what he and others need is social assistance, not persecution and punishment. One person was in jail for 1 year. One person put in jail for 1 year costs about $100,000. So who's benefiting from this? When mental health support is much less available, it's irrational, and it's often why police budgets are astronomical. Often in Canada, it's as much as 43% of a municipality's expenditures is the police budget. Montreal's Defund the Police Coalition, which is 65 different community organizations joined together, they propose a reallocating of half of the police budget to support the well-being and security of communities who are targeted by the police. It's costing the police more to go after people for breaking all these laws, like not sleeping outside, panhandling, etc. So let's take some of that money and help the people so that the cops don't have to go after them. Health, housing, education, and a universal basic income would address these issues. Instead, they give police more money. Montreal in 2023, the police budget was $800 million a year, which is $63 million more than it was in 2022. That money could go to shelters, building shelters, public transportation, schools, climate change. Defunding the police is the same as the revitalization of the commons. It's transformative justice. It's just reallocating money in such a way the police don't get as much money, but they're not spending as much money pursuing people who are committing crimes that are the result of poverty and mental illness, and trying to help these people to offset the need for the police to issue summonses against them to begin with. It's not even talking about the cost to the judicial system. These transformative justice efforts affirm humanity, eliminate inequality, eliminate social hierarchies. They promote shared well-being and increase safety. We want a system of social insurance and welfare based on care and solidarity, not on fear and punishment. For example, Winnipeg, Manitoba has nonviolent programs to support public safety. For example, Eugene, Oregon has a mobile crisis team that responds to anything that seems like it might be a mental health crisis to avoid people being murdered by the police. The struggle with police violence is about how we understand security. From the 17th and 18th century, ideas that the social contract is to protect against violence and larceny. People feel unsafe, insecure, and full of fear. Karl Marx disagreed. He said this obsession with the defense of security serves the wealthy communities, and it maintains inequality. In other words, and this is very true, the police are really not there to serve and protect you. They're there to serve and protect the property of the wealthy and the lifestyle of the wealthy. They don't want anything unsightly on the street. They don't want any noise to interrupt their little reverie. They want no reminder that people suffer. Marx was a journalist, and he covered peasants' struggles for rights, especially the ban on collecting firewood and the fines that were levied against people caught, and then forced labor to pay those fines. The wood thief has robbed the forest owner of wood, Marx wrote, but the forest owner has made use of the wood thief to purloin the state itself. That's pretty good. So the efforts of subsistence became an offense. These people are just trying to stay warm in the winter. Peasants had no choice but to beg and steal. In 1516, Utopia by Thomas More, he wrote this. This is a poem. The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose off the common and leaves the greater villain loose who steals the common from the goose. The law demands that we atone when we take things we do not own, but leaves the lords and ladies fine who take things that are yours and mine. The rich argue that material security of the common people made them lazy. Republicans say that all the time. You give food stamps to people, they just get lazy. Make them work. The threat of destitution and poverty will make them work. This should sound so familiar. And this has been going on, this argument, since the before, but in the 1500s. Therefore, the elites are creating insecurity, and they have been ever since. Consider what the chief actuary of Prudential Life Insurance Company said in 1919, voicing common critiques of the early social insurance programs that his industry saw as a direct competition. He called the threat of poverty and hunger in old age the most powerful incentive which makes for character and growth in a democracy, and said gratuitous governmental pensions would undermine character building. I could do with a little less character and a little bit more money, to tell you the truth. Economists call this the moral hazard of helping people. If too lenient, people will commit more crimes and give 1 inch and they will take a mile. Social welfare encourages shirking, going to the doctor too much, makes you study things that are impractical, makes you not save for your old age. The rich fear a culture of welfare dependency. Cutbacks in the 1980s and 1990s, for example, they killed the child tax credit. They killed the COVID era policy that reduced child poverty. Thanks to the money from COVID that was given during the time of that whole situation, child poverty dropped by 40%. Apparently that's a bad thing. I don't know. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's a bad thing, but so it's better to risk child hunger than parental laziness. Okay. The same argument is now invoked to crush student debt relief. The conservative Heritage Foundation recently warned that the moral hazard of canceling student debt is massive. Should their financial burdens be lifted, young people might make different career choices and then, oh God, join a labor union Or, God forbid, they might just enjoy a much needed vacation. The hazard, in other words, comes from the possibility that millions of people might be less stressed out and more free. The real threat, the systems and entities that undermine public good for private gain. They reject the idea that we reject the idea that common security is something to fear. The powerful push insecurity on others, but not on themselves. The most impressive increases in output in the history of both the United States and other Western countries, writes John Kenneth Galbraith in The Affluent Society. The most impressive increases have occurred since men began to concern themselves with reducing the risks of the competitive system. Labor, productivity, and material security, in other words, are not at odds. They have a reciprocal relationship. This means, he continues, that eliminating uncertainty in economic life is possible if we can muster the political will to do so. Universal basic income, the nirvana, the unattainable. The Black Panthers had a 10-point program, and they worked with Martin Luther King and the National Welfare Rights Union and Nixon, if you can believe that, to propose a universal basic income. And I know this is going to shock everybody. Have a seat. We don't want anybody passing out and falling on the ground. It was rejected in the Senate. So, for example, in 1979 in Manitoba, there was an experiment in universal basic income. And they did it for a year. And then the records of how it went were ignored for 30 years. Later, a University of Manitoba professor went back and studied the results. The program had been a huge success. It provided reasonable and secure income at the time, $23,000, which was a good income at the time. Let me get the details here. Dropout rates waned. Hospitalizations fell. People's mental health improved. Children went to the dentist for the first time. Their mothers took longer maternity leaves or pursued higher education. People still worked, but they worked a little bit less in order to spend time with their families or to study. When teenage boys turned down jobs, it wasn't because they were slacking. It was because they were in school. More people turned down employment that underpaid or humiliated them. Some started their own businesses. According to a 2020 analysis, both property crime and violent crime significantly decreased. Improving financial security, it turns out, is an effective way to improve public safety and a way to do so peacefully. This professor wrote it up in Town with No Poverty, this article he wrote. He said, you no longer needed to be afraid when you had this universal basic income. The absence of fear was a threat to the politicians and the business owners. They couldn't keep employees who were mistreated, you know. So possessions and wealth become their own prison. You have an insecurity that you might lose them. Billionaires don't feel secure. They can never have enough. They always want more. Obvious growing homelessness should scare all of us. Not because of them, but because they're vulnerable. And because we live in a society that refuses to provide struggling people basic shelter and dignity. How can any of us feel secure? I don't feel secure when I see people living on the street. And it's not because I see them as a threat to me. I see homelessness as a threat to all of us. Our fundamental fragility is held up for us to see. The insecurity of being homeless, the insecurity of being human. And this is called Kura's gift. It should bond us together in mutual mutual support, this insecurity. Buddhism advises empathy. Stoicism advises equanimity. Activists argue that our insecurity can create an ethic of a shared vulnerability that champions social change. How to live in the volcano of civilization without suffocating. That's a great metaphor. What they're advocating here at the end of this book is that rather than feel isolated and fearful and blaming other people, what about if we saw our shared risk, our shared vulnerability, and joined together to try to address it? Kafka responded to workplace accidents by trying to stop accidents instead of blaming the workers. He helped redesign the workplace, the tools, the approaches, and therefore he saved lives. It lowered injuries, saved money for could be used for widows. His basic proposal of prevention remains a worthy lodestar. Why not? I know this is shocking. Why not house people instead of fining them for sleeping on the street? Why cancel student debt when education could be free? Why let corporations and billionaires exploit us instead of prioritizing equality and democracy? Why endure environmental catastrophes when we could pursue sustainability? Poor people are more likely to die or be injured in fires, by bad water, increased debt, increased police tickets, because the risk is distributed unevenly because of a system that manufactures material insecurity for some. Therefore, we need solidarity and political engagement, intentional effort to improve life on Earth, to create baseline security, to increase our dignity and our autonomy. 9 out of 10 people prefer financial stability to upward mobility. They're sick of the chase. They're sick of the competition. They like to work less and enjoy life more. Most people would gladly abandon the pursuit of wealth for just security. Insurance pools the risk. Perfect security is impossible. Reparative principles are essential for equity. We need to fix the mistakes that we've created that has made this system. This is not charity. This is solidarity, giving each other a helping hand. So the end of the book is called Accepting Kura's Gift. And the gift of life is fragile. We live in existential insecurity. We know that we are vulnerable and inevitably face death. And rather than isolate and live in a state of fear, we need to join together in care. We need to care. The essence of human existence is to be vulnerable and dependent. And this creates an ethic of insecurity, but this can be a powerful source of connection, because if you're dependent, we can rely on each other. We have to accept our vulnerability and our need for each other. And she quotes the best of anybody. This may be my favorite poem, I'm not entirely sure. The Second Coming by W. Yeats, William Butler Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction. while the worst are full of passionate intensity. This was written in 1919, a period of heightened tension, upheaval, political, personal, the aftershock of the Russian Revolution, the First World War, the Spanish flu epidemic, and he's talking about all the threats and insecurities that people felt. It's a poem steeped in the terror that insecurity can bring, and one that yearns for an impossible solidarity, for a center fixed and stable. Yeats longed for order and permanence, for the falcon to once again hear the falconer's command. Economic, physical, emotional, psychological insecurity, they're intertwined. They're personal and they're political. Manufactured insecurity is easier to control, makes it easier to control workers and create insatiable consumers. Capitalist markets generate change and instability. It keeps us scrambling to keep up, to have more, to have different, dangling that lure. The privileged rich, they can shelter themselves within this system. They rigged the game, but it cannot be won. It keeps them stressed and insecure too. They just never have enough. We rely on coercion and punishment and ignore the desire to give and receive care. We stigmatize care and undervalue it. I was talking with Deborah and this young man from the American Humanist Association, and he was talking about the concept of toxic empathy. That's got to be the most horrifying thing I've heard in a very long time. Toxic empathy. Don't care too much. Don't feel too much. Don't identify with people too much because it's not good for you. Good Lord. Compare the incomes of a hedge fund manager and a teacher. That'll tell you everything you need to know. We look down on non-productive people, the weak, the dependent, the deficient, the person for whom a job is not possible for whatever reason, physical, emotional, mental. We look down on this. Well, not we, but society looks down on those people. We value production and health and financial success. The best thing you could say about somebody, they are such a success. The idiot, which means money. The ideology of isolation to ignore our mutual dependencies. That causes insecurity. That causes fear and hostility. So this is some more of the poem by Yeats, The Second Coming. The darkness drops down again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. At once prophetic and open-ended, the poem evokes despair and redemptive possibility. It condemns the ruinous and deadly forces that modernity has unleashed and the complacency of those best positioned to resist. But who has loosed anarchy and violence upon the world, and what is the nature of the rough beast who will be born to confront it? Yeats' personal views were far from equivocal, for he was quite politically engaged, serving for 6 years as one of the first senators of the Irish Free State. For a time, at least, he was convinced that nationalism and authoritarianism could slow or halt the widening of the gyre and force the center to hold. Faced with the tumult and uncertainty of life, Yeats rejected Cura's gift, preferring the promise of security offered by the strong men he admired, including Benito Mussolini, over what he considered the instability of equality and democracy. And the author says she fears business as usual more than she fears anarchy. I do not want the center to hold, and certainly not the center that esteemed poet longed for. Sometimes we need to decentralize and encourage other centers to proliferate. Things falling apart can portend doom, but it can also presage regeneration, allowing new possibilities to emerge amid the ruin. Where are we here? Fear feeds the authoritarian drive. We need to decentralize business as usual. Things falling apart can cause regeneration. There's power in shared common experience of insecurity. We need to shake the systems up. And she talks about examples of protests where wheelchairs were used to block traffic, or pipelines, the natives blocking pipelines. Or the debt collective, militant non-payment. We're going to have to defy authority to be free from authority. The debt collective has wait a second. Oh, they have a fora. They got together, and in these forums, people tell their stories about their insecurity as a transformative getaway. So the debt collective provides kind of an emotional, psychological support by having these regular meetings where people come and talk about, this is how things were until I joined this debt collective, and now working in solidarity with the group, this is how much better I feel. Kierkegaard said our ability to shape the future is a source of existential insecurity. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. We are free to choose ethically or unethically. And it's pretty much an understood fact that people embrace authoritarianism because they fear uncertainty and they don't feel up to the job of deciding what is right and what is wrong. Insecurity and imbalance frighten them, and they look for structure, control, and domination. Many denigrate snowflakes who need safe places. They approach vulnerability with bigotry and a sense of superiority. But material security and egalitarian conditions make people less reactive, less tolerant. Trust and support improves the security of all. Freedom can be achieved only through the freedom of others. And then finally, she says, let me find the page. This is not the competitive capitalist freedom of the self-made individual, but the kind of freedom that is enabled by community. It's the security that helps us to pursue what Albert Maslow called higher needs: beauty, self-expression, creativity. It's a new economy of care. And she ends the book by saying, taking care is the gift of care. So that was a very ethical look at the situation in which we find ourselves, and an explanation of why we're sort of trapped in this situation of corporate dominance, authoritarian control. I found this book really reassuring that there are ways to address this, but it's going to take working together with people. That's hard right now. People are mad at each other. It's very difficult. And they're looking for people to blame. The disdain I hear when people talk about the homeless and the poor. If you've ever been poor, it's like having cold water thrown on you when you realize that it can happen to anybody. And rather than judgment, we need empathy. toxic empathy. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me go through this book. I apologize that some of it was a little illegible. It's been a long time since I read this book, 3 years. I've had these notes sitting in my little spot over there, little stack of books that I kind of stockpile in case. So they just seemed appropriate for the moment. I hope it gave people encouragement. I hope it fired you up and made you angry. It makes me angry. And I think that that's an appropriate response to injustice, and it motivates. So moving forward, thank you very much for watching. Be sure you're subscribed, and be sure you're subscribed to anybody that you like to watch that you think you're subscribed to. Double check. There's been a lot of skullduggery going on. Subscriptions are being dropped. Notifications are being dropped. Nate was telling me the other day, I never get notified anymore of the videos you make, Helen. And I said, well, I can't control that. You have to check the bell. And his bell was checked. So I don't know. Thank you for watching. Check all the things, the thumbs up, the bells, the subscriptions. Spread the word. If you enjoy these videos that I make, tell people about them. And the reason I ask you to do that is because I don't make videos because I don't think they're important. I make them because I think the topics deserve attention. Sometimes I make them because I know people need a distraction. And so I hope that you'll point your friends and your family in the direction of my channel in response to trying to understand what's going on and looking for diversion from what's going on. And exploring things like spiritual evolution. That helps too. And maybe a few odd predictions here and there. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hear from from a lot of you very often. And I appreciate that. It makes me feel like people are paying attention. Start to recognize names. Feels like friendship to me. Okay, that's enough. Slongafoil. Sláinte.